Hey guys, what's up? It's Ameriie and I am bringing you my March wrap-up. I read 4 books this month, which is right on target with my usual. I usually finish 4 books in a month. 1 book a week is usually my average. And I had a really good one. Actually, one of the books was a carryover from last month because it was a buddy read that I was doing with Nana from SCS Reads. Make sure you check out her channel, wonderful channel. And she was a lot of fun to buddy read with. So let's get into the books. I was going to say 5 books, but I'm not finished with that book yet, so we'll get into that one. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. As I said, I buddy read this with Nana from SCS Reads. This was a really interesting read. First of all, I've been meaning to get to this book for ages, literally years. I've never read any of his work before. I've seen The Three Musketeers, but I never really read it. There was this really interesting biography that came out. I think it won the Pulitzer actually, or was it the Nobel? But it was about Alexandre Dumas' father, the author's father, who was the son of an enslaved Haitian and a Frenchman, I believe. So Alexandre Dumas is part black. That was really interesting, never covered in history class, unsurprisingly. And that was kind of like my spark to really want to read some of his work, because The Count of Monte Cristo is one of the most successful serial stories of all time. We have this huge book now, which is actually an abridged version, by the way. Nana was reading an unabridged version, which is way longer, but it was first released in France in little bits. I don't know if it was weekly, bi-weekly, or every month, but it was all in installments. The way a television show is popular now, that's how popular this story was. So every time the new installment came out, people were talking about it. They wanted to know what was going to happen next. So I really enjoyed this read for the most part. The first 200 pages, this much, breakneck fast. There was always something happening. I could not put the book down. Then we kind of go into the rest, and I was feeling kind of like things slowed down a bit, but not only did they slow down, there's a certain way that the story is told, which is very telling. You know the whole adage, show, don't tell. Telling works when you want to just fast forward through time very quickly. Person walks into the room, this was said, yada yada yada, 10 days passed, and yada 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 yada. But we didn't dip in and out of that. That's actually the storytelling style. Wonderful for pacing, but the emotional connection, the investment I had with the main character, that suffered a bit. One of my favorite characters is actually the Abbe that's in the beginning of the story, who actually helps Edmond Dante, who later becomes the Count of Monte Cristo. I really love the Abbe. Even though we're being told so much, there was something about this man that just really made me empathize with him. And Edmond Dante is so naive, and you see how he goes from this incredibly naive young man. Although he was trapped in a prison for so long, he was made almost worldly without ever having to leave his cell, because the Abbe was so intelligent and so knowledgeable. So he kind of just poured all of his knowledge into Edmond Dante, which was wonderful because it allowed Dante to grow. However, because he was, for obvious reasons, very vengeful, the vengeance plus all that knowledge basically equated to someone who was extremely calculating and kind of cold. In a nutshell, I really enjoyed this read, but it kind of slowed down for me toward the middle and the end, mainly because I felt there was a lot of telling. I was being told the story, so I didn't experience some things that probably would have been wonderful to experience and would have given me more connection. Mind you, that might have a lot to do with the fact that this is an abridged version and not an unabridged version. So it was great for pacing, however, that connection suffered. Number 2, I felt like there were some characters that I just would confuse a lot. There's a lot of Mademoiselle this person and Monsieur this person. And although the story really concerns maybe 4 families, when you add in the extended family members, it became a bit confusing. And not only was it confusing because of that lack of emotional attachment, they just became names on a page. Again, I blame this a lot on the fact that I was reading this abridged version. And the third thing is that I actually didn't really like the Count. I loved him in the beginning when he was innocent, and I even loved him when he was still learning a lot about the world and wasn't as naive, and when he first came out and he was being very helpful, but there was a coldness in him that I just didn't really love. Now, I'm going to just go into a little slight spoiler so if you haven't read The Count of Monte Cristo, if you haven't seen the movie, I'm going to give you time to just step away or to just turn the volume down really quickly. All right, the end of the book, after all of this stuff happens, you know, his love marries someone else, she has a child with someone else because she didn't wait for him. Mind you, she didn't wait for him for like, not even a year. I mean, after he was taken away for a year, this was supposed to be the love of his life. She just marries someone else, the other guy that was vying for her attention all of this time. She marries him. He's actually part of the reason why the Count is in jail for all this time. But she marries him because she doesn't know. They have a child. Fast forward 18 years later. The end of the story, when all is said and done, she finds out the truth. She knows who he really is, which she already knew, but she finds out what her husband did. They give away all their possessions, and she's like, I'm just gonna go live in a convent. And I'm like, wait, what? Why does she need to go live in a convent? Why would she have to give away everything? Like literally every penny. And the Count of Monte Cristo, who adopted this former princess, it's a long story, but basically she's a former princess. She could have been enslaved. He buys her, but really he's just kind of buying her freedom. She loves him like a father, like a brother, a husband, a lover, all these things. They've never done anything. He's just taking care of her. But basically he literally sails off into the sunset with this girl, which was it was a little creepy and a little weird. And the love of his life lives in almost destitution, staring out of the window all day. It's actually the cottage that he shared with his dad. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, I appreciate it. And I guess I'll just be alone for the rest of my life and be sad. And my son may be killed. My husband shot himself because we left him. My son may be killed in the army. And I'll just stare out this window all day because I just never should have married that guy when I thought you were gone and you thought you were dead. At that time, there wasn't a lot that a woman could do. She couldn't get a job at that time. A woman's life path had almost everything to do with who she married. There was no way for her to get a job, nothing for her to do. So of course, he's gone, he's in jail or dead. She doesn't even know. She's just like, all right, I'll go with my fallback. The guy who's been here all this time, he's a really great friend of mine. I love him like family. I just never loved him like that, but he's the one here for me, so I guess I'll marry him. Not necessarily a great choice, but all right. And he was a fisherman at the time too, but you know, he had a job. So the only thing I fault her with is that she didn't fight hard enough to find out what really happened to Dante. She went to find out, but then when she was shut down, she didn't continue to bang on doors. She just kind of left it alone. And not even after a year, she decided to just marry. So I understand why he was a little salty about that. But really, the story ends with her staring out the cottage window and just being poor, and then her husband shot himself, and her son, her only child, is off to war because he's just certain that he's going to make it back because his friends have been okay all this time. And the Count of Monte Cristo is like, there, I've gotten my vengeance, I kind of feel better, but now I'm going to just sail off into the sunset with this little young tender. And it's like, I thought you had a love of your life. Like, what? There are many things that happened, and some of the things that happened I really, really loved. And he was a good person. He helped family members. He helped save families and family fortunes. But I never really liked the guy. Hey everybody, come on back, come on back. So now that we're back into the non-spoilery area, I just have to say, if you want to start a classic that doesn't bore you, this would be a great one. It will definitely hold your interest. There's a lot going on. Just about every page has something very important on there as far as understanding the dynamics and what is really happening with the greater scheme. But as is most likely, if you're used to reading a lot of modern fiction, you will definitely sense the difference when it comes to the telling versus showing, because you're just kind of told this story and it's an omniscient narrator. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I recommend The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. Wink, Poppy Midnight by April Geneviève Tuholk. As you remember, this was one of my most anticipated reads of 2016, and it did not disappoint. I am not going to go into the synopsis of this book because this is truly one of the books that you should go into as blindly as possible. It's the only way that the book can really, really work for you. The tagline is a hero, a villain, a liar, who's who. The author's writing is very atmospheric, very full, very lush, very poetic. I loved Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea. She has an ear for cadence and rhythm, and that's something that's very important to me. And it works really well for the story because the story is all about atmosphere and getting lost in this timeless space. What I've seen of her novels is that you just really can't really pinpoint when this is taking place. There's something classic about the setting. You can just fall into the book and get completely lost in the story because it almost insulates you from everything that's familiar, setting-wise. This story is told by 3 different POVs, a girl named Wink, a girl named Poppy, and a boy named Midnight. I'm not going to tell you any more because, like I said, it's best just going in as blind as possible. But I can't give a comp title. One of the comp titles this was compared to was We Are Liars by E. Lockhart. And I think that's a pretty good comparison because, like E. Lockhart's We Are Liars, you're trying to figure out who's telling the truth, and it's told in a way where you're not really sure who's telling the truth, who's bending the truth, and who's completely making things up. I really enjoyed this. I'm going to let you know though, if you are looking for a book that's fast-paced, action, this is not it. This is a slow roll, a slow unveiling. It's very lush, it's atmospheric, best read in as little sittings as possible. Highly recommend, especially if you really care a lot about language and atmosphere. I'm like so achy. Every time I put the book down, it's like I've been doing this like very big intensive like glute and lower back workouts. And I'm like, yeah, I've been getting my fitness on. Okay, now I'm going to get to the two books that I was telling you about. The one book that I finished and the other one that I'm currently reading. I wish I finished it so I could give you a whole wrap up of it, but I'm not finished yet. So I finally read Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, and I have the matching cover because we talked about that a gazillion times. The Assassin's Blade was one of my favorite books of 2015, but I had yet to start the whole series. I read The Assassin's Blade first, which are the novellas. I think they're like 4 novellas, because Wendy Darling of The Midnight Garden, you guys should check out her blog because Wendy and Kim are so fantastic. I love their blogs. It's one of my favorites. Wendy told me to begin with The Assassin's Blade. Great call. This was the perfect introduction to Celaena Sardothien. You see her skills, her cunning, her intellect. You see what made her who she is. And you also met some cool characters along the way and saw a lot of the world. I just fell in love with this, and there was a heartbreaking moment and I cried. When I talk about the moment, it still makes me cry. Loved it. On 10, ready for the series, ready to go. Then I was ready to read Throne of Glass. Now, I already heard that the series gets better and better as you go. And this is the reason why Wendy recommended that I begin with The Assassin's Blade. We have similar reading tastes, our reading tastes overlap, and she felt like that would be a stronger introduction. I think that was right on. If you guys want to read this series, I highly recommend that you begin with The Assassin's Blade and then go into Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass picks up where we left off with the last novella of The Assassin's Blade, and it sets up what's going on. It gives us the players. It gives us the beginning of the larger overarching mystery of the series, as well as what's happening specifically in this one book. But you don't really see Celaena getting her assassin on in Throne of Glass. Actually, I don't really think she does it at all. She's handling a lot of other things. She's building friendships and building relationships, but you don't really see her kill anyone. Celaena has a really big mouth. She talks a really big game. So anytime anything's happening, she's ready to pop somebody in the mouth. She's ready to punch somebody in the eye or knock their teeth back. She's always thinking along those lines. But if you could hear her thoughts and then see what she's doing, you're like, girl, please. If you begin the Throne of Glass series with this book, that's pretty much going to be your attitude. However, if you start with The Assassin's Blade, you really see how capable she is, and you see why she has the reputation that she does, which is basically the deadliest assassin in the land. So if you want to read this series, I highly recommend that you begin with The Assassin's Blade so you really understand who Celaena is, what she's been through, so that when she's thinking all this other stuff that she does in Throne of Glass, you've seen her back that up before, even if she doesn't here. But you still need to read this book so you understand what's happening. Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 2 in the Throne of Glass series. I wish I finished this. I'm still reading it. I'm a little past halfway. So it's not technically part of my March wrap up because it can't be. But I really wanted to add this in because, like I said about Throne of Glass, how you don't really see what's going on with Celaena as far as her assassinating. She really kicks into gear in book 2, and you really see the relationships that have been building in book 1 paying off. So I just wanted you to know that I'm reading Crown of Midnight and it's going very well. I'm really curious to see if The Assassin's Blade is going to be my favorite. You know how when you're introduced to something, it just holds a special place in your heart? The Assassin's Blade was the first time that I encountered this series, and it was just such a great collection of stories. By nature of it being these little slivers of different parts of her life and experiences, makes it kind of hard to top in my opinion. But we'll see, because people say it just gets better and better. So I'm reading Crown of Midnight, and I guess I'll be talking about that in next month's wrap up. More Happy Than Not by Adam Silvera. I love this book so much. This is a pretty slim volume, but he was able to pack so much life into this story. It's one of my favorite books of 2016. More Happy Than Not is about a boy who's lived through some pretty traumatic experiences and wants to forget them. It's pretty much a contemporary, but it does have a speculative twist. There's an institute that can help you forget what you want to forget, kind of like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. He wants to forget, but he's not sure if he wants to do it. Obviously, he would lose out on some of the relationships that he has. He would forget certain important things, although they're painful, they are important. So he's not really sure what he wants to do. I won't say too much because this is also a story that works very well when you're going in as blindly as possible. I kind of say that about a lot of stories though, because that's the kind of reader that I am. So I briefly shared with you what the story is about, but I just want to say too, one of the biggest things about this book, and this is completely non-spoilery, is that Adam Silvera is able to put so much of life. Like, I felt like it was really a slice of life that he's just folded between 2 covers. We're talking about class and gender and race and identity and teen pregnancy and Americanism. And it's done in a way that feels very natural, as if the author isn't intending to do that. And because it's so true to life, you recognize those themes, you recognize the issues without it being explicitly laid out. I really appreciated that because I feel like books should be about more than one thing or two things or three things if they're really true. And that's one of the things that I appreciated most about reading this story. Highly recommended. I almost forgot, a DNF. I did have a DNF this month. Look Who's Back by Tim Vermes. I can never pronounce his name correctly. This book is translated from the German. It came out in Germany earlier and it was just released in the States. I wanted to read this book so badly. I just couldn't get into it. I love controversial or potentially controversial reads and opinions and viewpoints. So in this story, it's the year 2011 and Hitler just appears out of nowhere and he doesn't understand what's going on. He's spouting all of his views, but everyone thinks that he must be some kind of comedian, like one of those comedians that stays in character no matter what. Great premise. The writing was great. He's meeting people and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And these are things that should happen. You should see Hitler being acclimated to his environment, to figure out what's happening, to understand what's going on, see how people are reacting to him, and see the relationships between Hitler and the main characters of the story, like the secondary characters. Definitely needed to happen. The scenes needed to happen, but I felt like it was so much of that for 80 pages because all of that is set up. It just felt a lot longer for whatever reason. And that's why I just kind of failed to keep my attention and I ended up DNFing it. It's such an interesting premise and me losing interest could have been due to mood. So if the story sounds interesting to you, I definitely recommend checking it out. So that's my March reading wrap up. I'm not going to do an April TBR because you already know that I'm very, very moody. So you'll just have to find out next month what I decided to pick up. Let me know in the comments below how your reading month went. Don't forget to like the video. If you liked it, please share the video and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, I will see you later. Bye. Which made me think, oh no, if the audiobook isn't good or if people don't like it for whatever reason, then the story suffers. But is it the story or is it the audiobook? In the event you don't like an audiobook, should you give a book another chance? Give it an actual read.